Geek presents an audiobook theater podcast. I am your host and writer behind 99geek.ca, Andrew Geczy, and this is being recorded on Sunday, March 7th, 2021 at 10:55 a.m. My goal in life has always been to write for television, but it's a goal I've had little luck so far in attaining. So instead, I've resorted to self-publishing novels on Amazon, but writing the monthly chapters like episodes of TV shows that people can download at patreon.com/99geek. Every chapter is released in 4 parts, a teaser and 3 acts, and every month features a different book spanning both science fiction and fantasy and every genre in between. That's right, I wrote all the books featured on this podcast trying to make ends meet in what feels like a poverty nightmare. I'm doing all of this alone, living off unemployment insurance. I don't have a budget, I don't have a team, no editors or producers. I have no backup, no support. I'm completely alone, pro bono, with nothing but my passion for telling stories, and thus I ask you not to judge me or my work or my production values too harshly. I'm doing the best I can, trying to wear all the hats. Tonight we'll be reading from Phase 3 of Season 1 of 99% Geek. This is the first week of the first chapter of the first book of Phase 3 of Season 1 of 99% Geek, a chapter of a book entitled Royalty. Remember, you can follow along at patreon.com/99geek. Chapters are somewhat standalone, but at least make sure you start on week 1 for the recap. This is indeed week 1. And if you're tuning into the Twitch stream, then you cannot follow along because I don't post it on the site till after I do this. Sorry. Yes. Also, I should give a content warning that this will be not necessarily suitable for a young audience. Not necessarily all the time will it be a lot, but it has the potential to go to some dark places. And I don't intend to put a lot of censors or limits on where I can go with this. It's going to be a dark world. And I described it, I think I described it on Twitter, and someone said they liked the way I described it. I described it as shitty people will do twisted things, and undeserving people will often fail and suffer. So watch out for that. If you're someone who gets triggered easily, or maybe you can't handle shittiness, then what are you doing here? Because that's what you're gonna get. We're gonna begin. Let's do it right now. So this is Royalty, Book 1, Chapter 1, concerning royalty, Week 1, and we start with highlighted passages from the pages of Allison's favorite books. Things today aren't as they once were. There are few on Chaldean who remember a time before the Great Flood, a time with land aplenty, made up of 9 unique continents connected by a world. That didn't sound right. It actually sounded better before, and then I changed it and something that sounded worse. All right. A time with land aplenty, a world made up of 9 unique continents connected by trade and commerce. Not just of goods, but of culture and art and magic. We were a prospering human society, a powerful alliance of nations that had the ability to accomplish anything and last 1,000,000 years. People were happy, and not just the very richest. There was contentment throughout all the people of Chaldean, and from that contentment bred apathy, and through that apathy, inequality grew. Magic became a luxury for only the most powerful, and soon the powerful were even keeping their tricks from each other, always trying to one-up one another in a rivalry that expended destructive energies, the likes of which laid waste to the land. They remained ignorant to the damage and suffering they were causing even as the rest of society collapsed around them. An hierarchy developed between the most powerful, the lesser powerful, and everyone else. The strongest began to call themselves royalty. No one knows exactly which royal was the first to make contact with the demons of the lower plane, only that they weren't the last, and it was this tearing of the planar veil that brought with it the violent climate change that rocked our world, bringing rising waters and the collapse of all civilization as we knew it. Now, only one landmass remains, a vast landscape, with our planet's last remaining forests and fertile land, only patches of which held up against the ravages of the end of the world. It is in those places the powerless of Chaldean hide and make their living, praying the day never comes that the higher and lower royals leave their flying nightmare city of Dunkel to cull the remaining villages. So few are left, and there are less with every rotation Chaldean makes around the sun. That was an excerpt from Chaldean, A History by Niles the Grass Pearson. This is Chapter 1, Concerning Royalty, released on patreon.com/99geek for March 2021. Concerning royalty. What is there to say about the royals of Chaldean? They are selfish, self-absorbed, vain, cruel, quick to anger, and violent. Were I ever faced with one, I wouldn't tell them any of this, however. It is in your best interest never to get on the bad side. All royals are different, but you can spot one by the magical energies they wield and the armies they command. Every royal, both higher and lower, was granted a single mighty stone golem as a reward for the pledge of loyalty to the demonic forces that manipulated the royal council. Many royals command more than one golem, however, usually taken as spoils from their conquests of other royals. You can tell how powerful a royal is by how many golems they have. Each one is the sole remaining possession of a now dead royal that came before them. While it is certainly possible for any person to rise in influence to the point that they might become a royal themselves, to anyone who would seek out such a title, influence, and power, I can offer only one word of advice. Don't. And that was an excerpt from A Royal Ponderance by John Smith. And if you think that's a fake name, you're probably right. Tink, 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 tink. Oka awoke to the sounds of hammers pounding, metal against metal, the construction having continued all through the night as Oka slept. Honestly, she was surprised she'd gotten any sleep at all, though she could still remember how tired she'd felt as her head had hit the straw pillow. Oka rolled over, the wooden bed frame creaking from the stress of her weight. The lumpy hay mattress did little to shape to her form, and the bed was a good 6 inches too short for her. She stretched out. Her feet hung off the edge, and if she held that position too long, it would cut off her circulation, and her feet would fall asleep. Edit. There you go. Instead, she drew her knees to her stomach, and with a loud sigh, she opened her eyes to find the wide green face of a goblin staring down at her. His head was oval-shaped, allowing for a wide smile when he grinned. Not that he was smiling now. His bat-like green ears twitched as he noticed she was awake, and a much thinner, more sympathetic grimace graced his lips. "Hey, big girl," the goblin said, offering her a bowl of scrambled eggs with a couple strips of bacon on top. "I brought you breakfast." "I thought food wasn't allowed in the bunks," she spoke, sitting up and taking the bowl from him. "What did you promise the foreman this time, Elrig?" Elrig, the goblin, and her best friend in the whole camp, sat on the edge of the bed.
Nothing. I simply told the foreman about how hard you worked yesterday, and he agreed. You practically reinforced the entire west wall yourself. He agreed to let you sleep and miss breakfast.
Oka gobbled down a spoonful of eggs as he spoke.
But even the cruelest slavers can't expect their subjects to perform without food in their bellies. And our master is far from the worst I've ever had.
Oka took another spoonful. You've been a slave for a long time, she spoke. It wasn't a question. He would spend a lot of time talking about his time before the camp, about his years before the camp. It's not, he's the same word twice. Always somehow without ever sharing any important detail like what, when, or where. How many masters have you served? He nodded.
Plenty,
He told her, fidgeting with the cuffs of his tattered blue tunic.
more perhaps than I could even count.
She could barely make out the sad look on his face. The only light in their dorm came from a slit of a window at the top of the wooden cabin. The smell was nearly unbearable, but after having no choice but to bear it for months, Oka hardly noticed it now. You ever see anything like this? Oka asked him, referring to the way things had been lately. They had both been slaves to Goldak for over a year, but in the past few weeks, everything had changed. They'd seen a greater influx of fresh slaves, and a push to grow and reinforce their small, meager camp. The wooden walls surrounding the camp had all been thickened with another layer, and all while they had been toiling away at that, they could hear the blacksmith working non-stop on weapons and armor. For who, Oka wasn't sure. Elrig nodded, and his face was about as grim as she had known him to get.
And it never ends well for us,
He said, nodding to her bowl in her hands.
Better eat up. While we still get 3 meals a day. You got nothing to worry about as long as they don't try to put a sword in our hands.
Oka looked down at her food and found she had lost her appetite. Slipping from her bed, she reached up and stretched her arms out above her head, nearly touching the ceiling. Looking at herself in the mirror, her tough, leathery greenish-brown skin scarred and weathered from her rough life, she bent to the side and heard her back crack. Grabbing her beige tunic hanging from the bunk over hers, she slipped it on. She wasn't concerned for her modesty when it came to Elrig. They had both seen each other naked enough times in the baths that they were practically family. At least, her idea of family. Orcish families were weirder than some. Elrig hopped off her bunk and handed her the bowl of eggs with an eyebrow arched. Oka sighed and, grabbing the bowl from him, poured the remaining contents past her tusks straight down her gullet. What would I do without you, Elrig? She asked, a smile forming on her lips.
Escape?
The older goblin said as he led her from the room. Oh, yeah, she agreed with him, following him outside. That's right. She had to look down to be careful not to step on him. She was just under 9 feet tall, and he was closer to 3 feet than 4. It took her eyes more than a moment to adjust to the bright sunlight as she stepped outside. Oka freezing in place on the doorstep and blinking repeatedly for her green-black pupils to focus. The wall came into focus first, towering and made of wood, with a walkway at the top for guards to patrol and keep watch over the surrounding sands of the barren wastes. The walkway connected to a suspended path that stretched over the wooden cabins of the tent to a 3-story wooden fort at the center of the camp. She squinted up in time to spot Lieutenant Drog. Master Goldax, second in command, cross the walkway and look around quickly before stepping into the fort. He was an orc, like her, fierce, strong, and intelligent. Drog was taller than Oka, and more weathered too, with a map of scars on his face, and her eyes could linger on him that morning for but a moment before he was gone from her sight. That didn't really sound right, did it? Let's get rid of that and. It didn't work. Her eyes got to linger on him that morning for but a moment before he was gone from her sight. Maybe there should be commas there too. Her eyes got to linger on him, comma, that morning, comma, for but a moment before he was gone from her sight. There we go. Awesome. Editing on the fly. That's what we do here at 99% Geek, because we're really lazy. All right.
You there!
Came the voice of the foreman from far closer. Oka turned in time to see the large, imposing form of the foreman leering down on her. At least he was large and imposing for a human, though he had to stand on a raised platform to look down on Oka.
Oka, Elrig, make your way to the armory. You're both to be fitted for training.
Training, Oka repeated, straightening as tall as she could get and approaching the four men so close their nose almost touched. There must be some mistake. I'm not a warrior. It's not that she hadn't seen and participated in her share of violence. Oops. Everything's falling apart now, we're good. Before capture, she had done a lot to survive on Caldine, killed even. But her time with Elrig, well, that was better. She didn't want to go back. I was going to reinforce the east wall. The four men took a step back, forgetting that he was on an incline. Not wanting to surrender his height to her, he stepped forward again and rooted his feet in place, quivering slightly though he was.
We don't have time for that anymore,
he said, and she lifted her hand to place on his shoulder. He flinched, but patted the muscles in her arm.
Trust me,
he said, his voice faltering.
There's been no mistake. Hey, come on.
Sorry, their voices sound very similar. I should have been more careful with that.
Hey, come on,
Elrig said, pulling at her pant leg.
No point arguing now. I'll race you there, and won't even make you say I told you so.
I need some water. Water break. Do 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 do. Elrig set off in a jog from the cabin around the edge of the camp towards the smithy. Oka followed after him at a slow walk, but had no problem keeping up with his pace with her much larger stride. I don't understand, she muttered to him, her mind too distracted to pay any attention to his challenge. They've never tried to arm us before. As she kept up with Elrig, her boots sunk into the sand with every step. Why now?
Why do you think?
Elrig asked Oka rhetorically.
Goldak's desperate, of course. If he's arming even us lowly grunts, even his lowly grunts, like us, it means he knows they're coming.
As they got to the armory, jostling out of the way for a couple armored human slaves running to the gate, Oka slowed even more until she came to a complete stop. Elrig turned around to wait for her. Who are they? Oka asked, feeling only more confused now than ever. Elrig just shrugged, something he did quite often.
Does it matter?
He asked and led her into the armory.
Just hope they don't got the golem with them, and maybe we can make it out of this alive.
Scene change. Scene change. Lieutenant Drog strode into Goldak's war room and stabbed his finger into the map spread out across a large table, his eyes glaring daggers at the merchant Goldak.
We won't see them coming until they pass this ridge.
Drog spoke in a growl at his master. Goldak wavered like a bobblehead under his large, resplendent colored turban as he considered his second-in-command with not nearly enough concern. Well, that was dramatic, he said, taking a sip of the drink in his right hand. You didn't even look at the map. Are you even sure you're pointing at the right thing? Drog looked down at the map and then back up at Goldak. Yes. Goldak was a fool. Drog even thought he dressed like a fool, always in silk robes with bright neon colors that just begged for someone to rob him. He'd always been a poof. But, while always the fool, Goldak usually knew his place. At least, he used to. Goldak was a shrewd and skilled businessman. And apparently I spelled shrewd wrong. Oh, it's not ED. There you go. You learn something new every day. Goldak was a shrewd and skilled businessman, world-renowned even. He'd bartered and negotiated more trade routes between the remaining settlements of Chaldean than anyone else alive. He also wasn't going to have such an exaggerated accent. It was going to be pretty exaggerated, but apparently I only go from 0 to 10. And Drog had been at his side, head of his security through all of it, since it had just been the two of them. The whole time, Drog had never once considered abandoning him. Not once. But that was before Goldak thought he had what it took to become a royal. That was before Goldak became obsessed. It hadn't all been at once. First came the fame and notoriety. He'd had contacts in every corner, but there was one contact he didn't have. And then he met Marius. Trading with royals, growing his empire, Drog watched Goldak slowly succumb to greed and entitlement before his very eyes, and Drog could do nothing but enable him. Any less would only turn Goldak against him, and now was when Goldak needed him more than ever. A lot of weird pronoun use in that paragraph, but it makes sense, so that's all that matters. Goldak had taken something that didn't belong to him, and he was convinced they were going to come for it. The ridge, you say? Really ridiculous. Sorry, I'm so sorry. The ridge, you say? Goldak spoke, glancing down at Drog's finger. Well, that's hardly enough time. Can't we send out some scouts for an earlier warning? I did, sir. Drog told his master as Goldak passed him to step outside onto the suspended walkway. It's unlikely we'll see them again. Drog joined him outside, squinting his eyes under the blistering sun. They had built their trading post right dab center of the barren wastes, a strip of desert that separated the vast and flying city of Dunkel from the rest of Chaldean. There was nothing there for them, no fertile ground for crops, no trees for lumber, no water for drinking. Goldak made it work. He set up the trade routes for the goods they'd need. He'd brokered the regular payments, the increases as they grew their ranks. He had taken what Drog had been sure was a doomed project and turned it into a years-long endeavor. A many years-long endeavor. He'd beaten the odds. But Drog wasn't sure he'd be doing that a second time. Drog leaned on the railing beside him, and they both looked out at the brown beige sand. Do you think they'll attack today? Goldak asked, his gaze steady on the ridge. Drog watched his master. It depends on how much they hate you, he growled to Goldak. The extravagantly dressed merchant frowned. Today, then, What did you steal? Drog asked, and he knew it wasn't his place, but he asked anyway. If you would just tell me. What good would it do you now? Goldak asked, looking away from the ridge, down at his forces. How many able bodies do we have? He changed the subject. 500 men-at-arms, Drog told his master. 40 of them were trained in bow and arrow, and he had those assigned to the walls. As he spoke, there was a rumble in the sand. The walkway they were on shook and jostled. Drog's gaze returned to the ridge and watched as 3 distant crucifixes rose over the sand dune. 3 symbols of the approaching horde, and nailed to those crucifixes were 3 humanoid figures. It took a moment for Drog to realize they were still alive as they squirmed in agony at their torment. Not symbols of the approaching horde. That makes it seem as if it's a Christian horde. 3 signs of the approaching horde. There we go. Much better. They are the first signs that people are approaching. There. Anyway. My God! Goldak spoke in shock. Who are these people? Who are those people? Sorry. Drog brought... I think he's looking at the people crucified. Sorry. My God, who are those people? Goldak spoke in shock. Drog brought up his trusty monocular to his good eye and made out the distant faces. Who Drog, who? Goldak asked his second. Drog growled. I was wrong about the scouts, he grumbled, passing his binocular to the merchant and striding back to the war room. Goldak glanced out at the ridge. Those are our scouts? He asked, lowering the binocular and chasing after Drog. Well, that's not good. What are we going to do, Drog? He stopped outside the fort as Drog came out to meet him, this time carrying a longbow and a quiver of arrows. Oh, I like that, Goldak said, clasping his hands together. Strike some fear into their hearts, yes, and get some sweet revenge. His voice is getting more and more ridiculous. Drog judged the distance, notching an arrow and pointing it high in the air as he drew all the way back. Drog released the arrow, and everyone in the camp watched as that arrow soared high into the air and then slowly drifted down on the wind to thud perfectly in the center Scout's head. Oh, Goldak said, peering across the distance with his binocular. A mercy killing, I get it. Of course, we don't want our own people to suffer. He lowered the binocular. Good shot, by the way. Now I remember why I promoted you so many times. Drog fired off 2 more arrows as the crucifixes were lit aflame, and the 2 remaining scouts began screaming their lungs out. One of the 2 had already been gutted, his intestines strung around his neck like a necklace. Both their inhuman wails cut out moments after they began, as Drog's arrows found their marks. Drog got off the suspended walkway onto the wall and followed it to the southern side overlooking the ridge. Goldak followed after him. A royal would send his forces out to meet them, Goldak stammered away. Wouldn't they, Drog? But you're not royal, Drog growled at his master. And we don't have that kind of army. He still couldn't see the approaching army past the ridge, besides the 3 elevated burning crucifixes, but he knew one thing for sure. Even if he got all 500 of their men and women to stomp their feet as loudly as possible, there was no way they could make that kind of ruckus. They were outnumbered at least 2 to 1. A royal would also decide their own battle strategies, Goldak said, and Drog didn't like where this was going. A wise royal listens to their advisors, Drog suggested, though he knew it was a long shot. There was little luck dissuading Goldak once he had an idea in his head. We have to meet them, Goldak insisted, or else we won't impress them enough to finally make me royal. Reluctantly, Drog pulled himself from the edge of the wall to peer back into the camp. Foreman, Drog called out to his second in command. Prepare 250 of our most expendable. I want them marching from the gate in 5 minutes. Yes, Drog, his foreman called up to him, and then began barking orders to his lackeys. Lieutenant Drog returned to the edge of the wall, and Goldak sighed. Together they watched the ridge and waited. Drog dared not speak again. He didn't even try to explain to his master that all those people they were sending out were going to die. As far as he was concerned, they were already dead. And that is the end of week 1. I hope you enjoyed the end of week 1. I put a lot of work into it, and a lot of hope and dreams and beliefs. My name is Andrew Geczy, and my brand is 99% Geek, found at 99geek.ca. Also, if you're watching this stream right now, feel free to talk in the chat while I read this, and then maybe I can talk back once I'm done. So, the outro, here we go. I'm a writer writing monthly chapters of novels like episodes of TV shows, releasing them in 4 weekly segments, a teaser and 3 acts on Sundays on my Patreon page. Every month it's a different book, over a range of genres, and they sometimes even cross over and connect. At the end of the month, the finished chapter is added to the PDFs attached at the bottom of every post. Finally, the finished books are self-published on Amazon. There's a dark fantasy story about a post-apocalyptic world where powerful royals rule and enslave the remaining people struggling to survive on the last remaining landmass. There's also a sci-fi story about a people on a dying world who have built a ship to a new one, but their project is almost brought down by a terrorist organization within their own ranks. Finally, there's a crossover story where characters from my other books are brought into the distant future, where the princess of a far advanced civilization, one that lives in a solar system-sized megastructure around a Dyson Sphere, needs help defeating her twisted, power-hungry brother. That's coming next month. And all these stories will be outside the paywall for all to enjoy as new episodes release weekly, and the finished chapters will be attached to the bottom of every post on the site in convenient PDF format, readable on computers, tablets, ebook readers, and phones at the end of the month. But that's not all my stories. But that's not all my stories. There's also urban fantasy tales about a teenage girl turned into a vampire against her will, or a scorned lover investigating paranormal phenomena, or journalists covering news and politics in the Middle East. And there's a fantasy story about a fallen angel trying to stop the end of the world. All these stories are published and available on Amazon, and are also safe and sound behind the paywall in PDF format attached to an archive at the top of my Patreon page. It's only viewable by subscribers. My entire library of work, thousands of pages worth, is easily accessible to every subscriber at any level. There's even a Geekly Weekly blog which covers all the news you might have missed over the week, as well as ranks the week's worth of television and makes predictions on what new pop culture things might be in the public consciousness for the week. And then sometimes I cry about how shitty my life is. But you can always skip that part. Finally, I do video game streams, both multiplayer matchmaking as well as single-player campaign playthroughs. You can see me play games like Final Fantasy, Call of Duty, Hitman, and more. And you can see it all in one place. So stay tuned and maybe subscribe. It's only $1, and the support you show will go a very long way, I promise. There are also higher tiers. Give $5 one month and you can name a character or location or suggest a thing you might want to see. Basically, you get to give a noun and then I promise to incorporate that noun into one of my stories somehow. Maybe not the same month you give the suggestion, but within 3 months guaranteed. No matter how crazy, you can't sabotage me, I promise. Think of it like a fun improv game. And you can keep giving nouns for every month you pay at the $5 tier. Or if you give $10, you don't get 2 nouns, but you can give a description to go with your noun. Describe the personality of your character, or the look of your location, or the importance of your item. For $10, you get a noun and a description. You can also give $1 towards supporting my efforts at video game streaming or my weekly blog, if that's more where your interests lie. I'm as poor as it gets, living paycheck to paycheck and sometimes starving, so I'm dying. So I understand if you are too. I don't want to take food out of your mouths. Your attention is enough. Say something. Comment here, or at the very least, follow me on Twitter at Andrew Geczy, that's ANDREWGECZY, or Instagram at WingCommander4, that's WINGCOMMANDERIV, that's Roman numeral 4, WingCommander4, and that's also my gamer tag and everything. Live long and prosper, and may the force be with you. Long live Marceline the Vampire Queen. We are the 99% Geek.